what I'm trying to get to, Paul, is the propositions as a Baptist person and then a Presbyterian person, when I would see people quoting on Twitter or at the Baptist church down the street, and they would quote Augustine, they would quote C.S. Lewis, they would quote even Keller, and I would always think like, well, they practice infant baptism. Do you know that they believe in some kind of real presence in their and yet here you are quoting their stuff, as I've come to this point now, because even Martin Luther, when he gave his solas, it was wrapped in the Mass. And now when you take the solas and you put them, and when Gavin Ortland's talking to Father Stephen a few weeks ago, and he's trying to defend the solas, he's defending a completely different ontology. And that's where I'm trying to understand and grow. I don't know. How does that hit you?
Well, so looking around so part of what happened, it's over there. Part of what happened because my channel got at least a degree of visibility, and then people start sending me books. And I got piles of books. It's not like my office needs more of them. Kindle version preferred, thank you. The publisher sent me the paper ones. So Brett Sockold, a Catholic theologian in Regina, Saskatchewan, his grandma or his mom starts watching me. How this happens, I don't know. Probably downstream of Jordan Peterson and Bishop Barron, and says, you should send him your book. And so I get this book about transubstantiation, and it's like, what's this about? So I start thumbing through it, and his thesis was basically what Luther wound up doing is sort of approximating what Aquinas intended to do, but the context around Luther had changed enough that he was misreading Aquinas and Aristotle.
That was the other thing I wanted to hit, is that he didn't have a hive mind.
Well, yeah, he did, but it was a monastic one.
Well, okay, yeah,
and it was limited, which may or may not help. So this question that you raised, that these solas that arise, that are really more slogans than doctrines. It's really hard to fit a doctrine into 2 words. And all of the words being the same between all of the other. It's not really a doctrine. It's much more of a posture. And I think that's the best way to understand them, as a posture. And I think actually Gavin Ortland sort of makes an argument for that. But the argument then is very different from the argument today, because the cultures have changed dramatically and the contexts have changed dramatically. So, and which basically says you're probably better off with a posture, because at least a posture is something that is contextual. A posture is within Vervaeke's other 3 Ps as much as it's propositional, because a posture understands that a posture is always in relationship with something else. So, and that's one of the things that I remember being in seminary, reading for the first time the Christian Reformed Church Order. And I remember, it's not a long document. It's not terribly juicy to read. I work from it now quite often as a synodical deputy. But when I first read that document, I thought, wow, this document is to ensure doctrinal succession in an institution. That is what this thing is pointed to. Yet everybody knows that, well, the number one thing Christian ministers tend to get fired for is not doctrinal. It's behavioral. It's behavioral. And, I've never seen a defense of, let's say, a minister who's, I'm going to say sleeps with the organist, because it's safe today, because most of the churches that you and I deal with don't have organs. I've never seen a case that the minister who sleeps with the organist defends himself by saying, but I am doctrinally pure. And all of those things sort of came under the church order as conduct unbefitting. And it's like, that's community standard. And I'm not arguing that churches shouldn't discipline their clergy for moral behavior. I'm saying the system doesn't fit the language. And in fact, the system is smarter than the language. And so the language is helpful and functional, but the system actually has within it a bunch of ways that it cheats on the language, and everybody knows it and does it, and rightly so, as well they should, because everyone is smarter than even the language and the system. And one of the things I bumped into in my classes was classes as sort of this regional judiciary,
like a presbytery,
right?
yeah.
It's like the session,
Mm-hmm.
or the I don't remember. The Presbyterians have different. Anyway, so I remember in our rules in our classes, they had one rule that said one rule says weighty decisions must be ratified by a 2/3 vote. Oh. And then another rule is any rule in this book can be set aside with a majority vote. And it's like, so you could set aside the weighty. No lawyer looked this up, because you can set aside the weighty rule by a majority vote, thus making the weighty rule null and void. But the truth is, every functional classist understands how to work the language and the system, because then they all have a sense of it. Oh, this should probably be a 2/3 vote because this is really going to be significant. In other words,
that goes into the hierarchy of value, meaning that Peterson is just talking to. I'm mapping that onto worship, but you're talking about it like, because it makes sense if it fits this, this fits here, this fits here. Like
exactly. That's exactly right. And so the church is smarter than its rules, or even often its doctrine. But yet the church needs to be submitting to something. And so in a Protestant way, you submit to scripture and you submit to the confessions, which are themselves submitted and revisable to scripture. And very early on, I also saw that whole idea of the confessions being revisable just hadn't really happened in 500 years or 400 years, if you want to include the canons of Dort in our system. So there are lots and I just notice all of these inconsistencies, and I'm not offended by them. I'm not bothered by them, but I'm made curious by them. And for me, that says, and that curiosity is sort of the seedbed of wisdom. Not to necessarily, we have to destroy the system because these rules don't make sense. No, maybe the rules actually do make some sense, but understand the sense that the rules are trying to serve. And then suddenly the system has a chance of working reasonably well, but will never work perfectly because we live in this world and we are such.
My question is with like the mode of worship, though, that's kind of part of what I'm talking about here is those rules, propositions, confessions, also being placed where there's, like you're saying, like if everything is fitting into a hierarchy of importance of authority, and how we operate even in like our worship services, maybe should orient something like that in an embodied sense.
Yes.
And I'm not like, at least from where I come from, it doesn't seem like that's congruent, I guess. It seems like it would make more sense if there was more of a, well, you could put it this way, because even though I was a part of this kind of Calvinist church for a long time, even the altar call, say the altar call is the highest point. That's still like it's still like a you decision versus if the highest point is something like, a high view
Eucharist.
of Eucharist. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to understand, because I think that what I see in this space is, and in that modern space of the confessions and the propositions, like they are kind of forming something real that you're talking about, but then like an embodied way of kind of seeing that, and it not just be, I'm seeing confusion in this also because it's like, well, when you secularize worship, it also disrupts a hierarchy value of meaning. And what is the value of meaning is actually what is secular. And so I don't know. I just feel like these things fit together. The practice of worship, and that's why I think this whole orthodoxy thing is bubbling up so hard. And 10 years ago, it was Catholic, though. I mean, everyone was becoming Catholic 7 or 8 years ago. Do you remember that season?
And Anglican.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like that's what it's aiming at. That's the impulse is there.
Well, premise 1. We are small, frightened, short-lived, vulnerable creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start there. And small, frightened, short-lived, vulnerable creatures are really hungry for things like certainty and clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Certain things within the matrix of the Christianity and the Christian church afford moments of heightened clarity and power. It's not arbitrary that in certain kinds of evangelical churches, the sacramental moment is the altar call, because it's that experience of the moment of transformation, of an initiation. It isn't arbitrary or incidental that again, just thinking about the Roman Catholic Church 500 years ago, you can't let regular people partake of the cup, and the priest should have his back to the congregation, because this is the holy moment that needs to be guarded. Why is it in a good old evangelical altar call, every eye closed? Why every eye closed? Every eye closed is synonymous to the back of the priest.
Mm.
It's that holy thing.
Personal sacred moment.
Yep, it's a personal sacred moment. Now, if everybody's just peeping so that they can gossip after church about every week this guy gives up for the altar call. Every freaking week. How many times can this guy get saved?
Yeah.
Now, pastorally, you say, he's a Martin Luther. He's got a weak conscience. He feels things deeply, and he's just hungering for more of God. So, and that's why they say every eye closed, because don't gossip about this guy. He has something the rest of you should want to have, which is he has a hunger and a desire for more of God. Or maybe he's just neurotic,
or maybe he's performing.
Or maybe he's performing.
Yeah.
Except in most Baptist churches, you don't necessarily gain status by well, maybe in some. Well, it's like in the
look how holy that guy is, man. He really is close to God down there.
People are endless game players, and it doesn't matter what thing is most holy or salient to a community, there will be gaming around it. It's always the case. And so they'll be gaming around the Eucharist, they'll be gaming around the liturgy, they'll be gaming around the conversion, they'll be gaming around the estuary, they'll be gaming around any status hierarchy that's created, and status hierarchies create themselves at an instance. And so there will always be gaming. So
I think that the curious part of me, because I've been to a handful of mass, but is that the way that this is all piecing back to what Peterson did, is that it's causing me to psychologically look at worship in psychologically and spiritually.
Yeah.
In a very real, because I did this. I planned this thing for 15 years, plan this thing. And I'm psychologically thinking, well, what does it mean when I'm the guy up there during the altar call and I look down and at my feet is somebody kneeling down in prayer? What is that doing psychologically? It's almost like they're kneeling down to me. And I think everything can be abused. You could abuse Eucharistic practice in some ways, I'm sure. But it's just, when I think about at the very end of that moment, when the priest actually does administer that he's giving you something that's not him. At the very end of it, it's something, and it's something you can touch. And so I just think about that psychologically. I'm not sure where I land theologically. I don't have certainty about a lot of things, but I guess that's what I've been evaluating. I don't know. I wanted to put it out there to Paul Vander Klay.
Well, I think there's a every system has its temptations. So in a system of priests. Now, I'm being very deliberate about the difference between a priest and a minister.
Yeah.
Because priests are intermediate. I mean, I was talking to Father Eric one time, and I was saying, the whole question of women in office is very different in Protestant churches than Catholic churches. When I say that, people often, quite understandably, don't understand what I'm seeing when I say it.
Well, nuns
And
for
Father Eric
one.
got at me and said, yeah, we can make holy water. We make sacred oil. We make, because a priest, you have this entire system that says, here these people are set apart. Now, we do some setting apart in Protestant land. We're not fully deconstructed Catholics, really. And when you get back into like the normal people, I mean, I remember going to the Dominican Republic, preaching the priesthood of all believers, and all of the people were saying bullshit. No, you are the missionary. You're here. We're the pastor. We're here. We derive our authority from you and our status from you. And then because of that, we get authority and status from the people. I didn't understand that. I'm just a pup in his 20s saying, no, I went to seminary. It's the priesthood of all believers. We're all equal. And the Haitians are like, you're so full of shit. But we don't really care anything you say. The most important thing is that you're here. And so we're going to set you up into the front of the church, and we're going to demonstrate to the entire community that we have a relationship with you. And that has religious, it has political, it has economic, it has all of those things. So in some ways, the Roman Catholic priest is as a liability because they are a priest and not just a minister or a pastor. So they have that vulnerability, but they have a different sort of protection, because you're exactly right. The thing isn't the great sermon. There are plenty of things, I'm sure, that priests can gain status by in their own hierarchies.
Yep.
And in fact, they have a hierarchy. In the Christian Reformed Church, there are no bishops. And so we're all ministers of the word. But if you're an evangelical minister and, you're preaching sermons and people are in tears and your church is growing, oh, that's dangerous business. And worship leaders are almost worse, because the truth is the worship leaders will bring the feels a lot more reliably usually than the preacher. And the best thing, one of God's greatest blessings to me has been my failures. That someone will come around, and it's all relative too, because somebody might say, well, you get to have a building. Yeah, but I didn't build it. The community built it 60 years ago. I just inherited it because they needed some guy to come in and do the thing. But and that's why I'm glad that, I haven't broken 30 yet and 30,000 subs yet. And I'm glad I don't have 100. I'm glad I don't have that little YouTube plaque behind, with kind of the thing that a lot of people, and Peugeot doesn't put his up, and neither does Vervaeke. Good on them. They're smart guys. But, everybody's like, oh, look, this is what I got from YouTube, because anybody can have a YouTube channel, but only the hierarchies get and on and on and on and on. So all of these successes are potential spiritual liabilities. And that because you start, so you're a great worship leader and everybody is in tears and they're all just, and now, maybe you have multiple worship services. And then, there's always somebody in the church that's going to come up to you and say,
worship was great today, Christian.
Yeah, Christian, all the other worship here is always good, but it's just a little better when you're doing it. Really. So you really got to be on careful of that. And every system is going to have their own hierarchies and their own status engines for this.
So with that, like if it's inevitable, why the complaint that something like the Catholics make it so transparent that it's real?
I'm not sure what you're saying.
Well, I mean, the critique that there's bishops and that there's archbishops and there's a pope and all that kind of stuff. If it's real, if the hierarchies are real, because that's what it sounds like we're saying, is that they are real.
Yeah. They're overt and they're visible. Like, everybody knows. You get a group of evangelical pastors together.
Who's got the biggest church?
The hierarchies, the one with the biggest church, the one with the most staff, the one with the prettiest buildings, the one who actually wrote a book and nobody else did and had it published, the one whose books actually sold. They're the even stranger ones, not the ones who, because they have a mega church, they managed to sell all of those copies to all of the people in their church plus their mom. I mean, hierarchies always develop. We cannot, and the reason hierarchies develop, again, this is what you get from Peterson or Vervaeke, the reason hierarchies develop is because of combinatorial explosiveness. You have to know where to pay attention. And so whether or not you want hierarchies to develop, they will, and you have to deal with them. Now, you can make them overt or you can make them implicit. And the truth is that modernity makes some things overt and some things implicit, and tradition makes some things overt and some things implicit. But you've always got to deal with all of it in either way. And every different approach has its own, it's always trade-offs, has its own strengths and weaknesses. And so, and at some point, because there are hierarchies and because life demands choice, you have to choose what to do with the hierarchies that you've been given. Or you can switch to a different set of hierarchies. That's fine. But, so I was, again, just Tom Holland, and one of the biggest media blitzes brandings that ever went out was the anti-papal brandings, where, what they did was say, here's the life of Jesus. This is the life of the Pope. How's that look? And that continues today.
Yeah.
The Pope lives in a palace. Jesus says, birds have nests, foxes have dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And so then, we're going to have a humble apartment for the Pope. But the Pope can't really have a humble apartment because he's in charge of an enormous institution, and neither can the senior pastor. So all of these tensions exist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's complicated. And I think you're trying to contend with that. You are contending with that. You have been contending with that, I think.
Yeah, you always do. And again, people, I'm glad my channel isn't larger than it is. At the same time, part of me wants it to grow. Part of me would be thrilled if some video I made went viral and I jumped from 30 to 100,000 subs in 3 months. Part of me would be thrilled by that. And I can translate that different ways.
Not me. I wouldn't be thrilled.
Yeah, right.